While there's no clear-cut answer to buying versus leasing a new car, buying is usually cheaper in the long run, but leasing comes close in the short run, especially against common long-term financing. Depending on your situation, leasing could actually save you money, or just be worth it if you want to experience multiple cars with the latest technology, or if you just don't want to worry about the hassle of selling your car or costly maintenance down the road. In this video, we're going to go over what a lease is, the pros and cons of leasing, a full cost breakdown including a 6-year breakdown between leasing and financing, and some other things to consider. First, let's get into what a lease is. A lease is simply a long-term rental agreement with a predetermined duration and mileage limit. There are two main expenses that you're responsible for paying during a lease. First is the estimated depreciation. The automaker or bank will estimate what they think the car will be worth at the end of the lease given the duration and mileage, and this figure is called the residual. It is also non-negotiable. So if a car costs 20 grand and the residual is 12 grand, you will end up paying 8. If you end up getting the car for 19 grand though, you'll only end up paying 7 in depreciation. The nice part about this is that you can actually buy the car at the residual price at the end of the lease if you want to. More on that later. The second fee on top of that is a rent charge, which is pretty much like interest on a car loan. But on a lease, the interest rates are usually about twice as high as a car loan. You are, after all, borrowing an entire car and only paying for a portion of it, so it's only fair that you pay a higher rate. Other fees that may apply include excessive wear and tear. If you go over your mileage limit, you'll be charged a fee per mile, and depending on the brand, it can be pretty expensive, so you'll want to make sure you figure out your mileage needs beforehand because it's always cheaper to do so. Also, if you return the car with, say, bald tires or big scratches and dents, you could be responsible for the damages depending on the terms, which again varies by brand. So now let's look at some of the benefits of a lease because there are quite a few, and not just being able to drive a new car every few years. For starters, one of the biggest benefits of a lease is having a lower monthly payment even with less money down. Second is that leasing a car is mostly a worry-free experience. During the lease, you're usually covered by a bumper-to-bumper warranty for most of, if not the entire time. This saves you from having to worry about small things breaking, which is something a lot of people do worry about. In fact, more than half of people who buy a car end up purchasing an extended warranty, which can add a couple $1,000s to the purchase of a new car. You also don't need to worry about bigger maintenance items like replacing the spark plugs or doing the brakes. You may not even need to worry about replacing your tires during a lease, which of course depends on the kind of car you drive, how much you drive, and of course, how you drive. Another benefit of a lease that's not often mentioned is saving on taxes. When you purchase a car, you owe 100% of the sales tax right off the bat, which is usually thousands of dollars these days. With a lease, in most states, you only pay sales tax on what you pay towards the lease instead of the entire value of the car. Lastly, another big benefit, which is probably my favorite for a lease, is being able to buy the car when you're done. So if the car is worth a lot more than you expected, or if you just really like the car, you have the option of buying it. And the opposite is true. If you don't like the car very much, or if the car depreciated more than expected, or if, say, the car got into an accident and was repaired and you don't really want it anymore, you can just return it. One thing to keep in mind though is that Tesla does not allow you to buy their leases, which is kind of why I wouldn't recommend leasing one. So now let's talk about the cons of leasing. To start, although I'm going to get more into the details of costs later on, it's safe to say that leasing is usually more expensive than if you were to buy a car and keep it for the long run. And this is mostly true even if you buy out your lease because there's things like acquisition fees, and if you have to buy out your car, you may need to get financing, which is going to be for a higher used car rate instead of a new car rate. Also, lease rates are usually around twice as much as financing. Rates these days are close to 10%, maybe even more depending on the brand. This is a whole lot different than in 2019 when lease rates were like 4%. Another con is that you have to deal with mileage limits. Your commute could change over the next few years, and if you drive, say, 5,000 miles over your lease limit, you could end up paying an extra $1,000 on top of your lease when you return the car. Oh, and on the topic of returning a car, brands usually charge a few extra $100 as a disposition fee when you return the lease. Another thing is that you have to be careful with things like damages. Although some brands are more lenient than others, if you get a big scratch or dent and don't fix it, it could cost you when you return your lease. Finally, another disadvantage is that leases are pretty complicated. A lot of people don't realize this, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can get brutally ripped off when leasing a car. I've seen situations where people are paying more to lease a Corolla than if they were leasing, say, a decent Lexus. Now, let's get into the numbers, but one important factor that I have to mention is that not all leases are equal. If we go over to the Honda website, which has all their leases, you will quickly notice this. For example, this Civic LX leases for $260 a month with $3,400 due at signing, but this HR-V LX, which is a more expensive vehicle, leases for $10 less per month and with $200 less due at signing. In some cases, this could be due to a better residual value, but with this case, it's just because the Civic has a much higher rent charge. Because automakers often need to sell certain models more than others, they will often change their incentives in lease offers on a monthly basis, which can sometimes lead to situations where certain leases give you a whole lot more car than others. This is why it's important to compare multiple leases across multiple brands, because you might think, I can only afford to lease a Civic, only to find out that an HR-V lease is quite a bit cheaper than a Civic lease. Alright, so let's do an actual lease versus finance comparison, and for this video, we're going to be using that 2023 HR-V LX as an example. For the terms, we'll be doing a 36-month lease taken from Honda's website, a 36-month loan at 3.9%, which is Honda's special financing rate for the HR-V, a 60-month loan at 4.9%, and a 72-month or 6-year loan at 5.9%. And to make things a little more interesting, since we're doing a 6-year car loan, we might as well throw in what it would be like to do 2 back-to-back leases over the same 6-year period and to compare the cost between the two later on. Here we have the HR-V's MSRP of $25,095, including destination, which is the fee to ship your car to the dealership. Now, this HR-V lease in particular has a capitalized cost of $22,188, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be able to buy the car at that price. It's just the way this lease is being structured. What you gain here, you're probably losing with a higher rent charge, as I'll show you later on. Honda's HR-V lease posted on their website is with $3,200 down. So to keep things simple, we'll just do $3,200 down across the board, leaving us with our monthly payments. The reason why I have a 5 and 6 year loan is to make it more realistic for many people, because a 3-year loan leads to pretty high monthly payments, which might just be out of the budget for many people. So after the first 3 years is up, here is how much you would have made in total payment. Obviously, with a 36-month loan, the car's been paid off, but for the other terms, we still have loan balances shown here. And here we have how much has been paid towards interest or rent charge during this period. Now, the HR-V has a residual of $16,060. This is what Honda thinks the car will be worth at the end of the lease, and as such, we'll be using it as our resale value for the car. Given the resale value, this is how much equity you would have at the end of the terms. With the lease, you have no equity. With the paid off 36-month loan, your equity is the car's resale value. For the 60-month loan, your equity is $6,650. This is the difference between the loan balance and the resale value. For the 72-month loan, your equity is $4,119. But it's important to note, this is where a lease can have a significant advantage. If the HR-V happens to be worth more than the residual, you could purchase the car or even trade it in to take advantage of that equity. Assuming that you sold the car at the end for that residual value, here is the total cost over 3 years versus leasing. As you can see, financing turns out to be cheaper across the board, but only by a little bit when it comes to financing over 6 years. Now, this could be a different situation though if the car ends up being worth, say, $1,000 less than the residual. Assuming you bought out your lease and paid the residual in cash, this is what your cost would be versus financing. Quite a bit more than when financing at 36 months, a little more than when financing at 60 months, but actually less if you financed for 72 months or 6 years. But note how I said if you bought out your lease in cash. If you financed the residual for 3 years at say 5%, this would actually bring your total to nearly $30,000, making it the most expensive option. And I know this is a lot of numbers to deal with, but this is where things get quite interesting, and I want to know what you would do given this scenario. For this part, we'll be looking at leasing 2 HR-Vs back-to-back over a 6-year period versus financing 1 HR-V over 6 years. For this, we're just going to assume that we can get the same lease deals 3 years later on, doubling the cost of our lease, giving us a total of $24,328 versus a purchase cost of $29,251 including interest. Since with a purchase, after 6 years, you'll still have a car with some decent equity versus being stuck with nothing at the end of 2 leases, this automatically makes financing look like a way better deal, but there are some factors we need to consider. For starters, a nice benefit of leasing is that bumper-to-bumper warranty protecting you from big repairs like, say, an AC failure. And to match that with owning, we're going to throw in a $1,500 extended warranty when financing. This now brings the purchase cost to $31,036, but now we also need to account for maintenance. Whether you lease or purchase your Honda, it comes with 2 years of free maintenance, so for a lease, we just need to pay for the 3rd year. According to this chart, the 3rd year will cost around $343. Paid twice on a lease is $686. With a purchase, those next 4 years in maintenance will cost around $2,000. Now, when comparing the two, you have a purchase total of around $33,000 versus a lease grand total of around $25,000. If we assume that the HRV has, say, $11,000 in equity at the end of the 6 years, this brings the total cost of financing to $22,036. This means that the lease turns out to be around $3,000 more expensive over the 6-year period, but for that extra money, you did get to drive 2 new cars instead of 1, all while enjoying a lower monthly payment. So I'm curious, what would you choose given this scenario? Here's some other things to consider, such as how many miles you drive. Many people think that leasing is just for those who don't drive very much, but this isn't true. You can usually pre-purchase your miles for a pretty nice discount. For the HRV, it's just 10 cents per mile, so if you wanted to double the terms to 20,000 miles per year, it would only cost you an extra $3,000 or $83 per month, which is quite reasonable. There's actually a strong case for leasing when it comes to those who drive a lot. You just need to have a good idea of how many miles you need before you start your lease. If you drive far less than 10,000 miles though, buying and keeping for the long run makes the most economical sense because the vehicle is likely to last a long time, assuming it's a quality car that you take care of. Another consideration is customizations like window tint. You can usually tint your windows as long as it's legal and done properly. If there's bubbles or damages though when you turn it in, you will have to pay to remove it. Same thing goes for other dealer installed accessories that add value to the car. Another consideration is your down payment. Given the very high interest rates associated with leases these days, it actually makes a lot of sense to make a decent down payment to lower your cost. But one thing to keep in mind though, if your car gets totaled from a bad accident, you won't be able to get any of that down payment back, so there's some risk to putting too much money down. Well, that's about it for this video, so thanks very much for watching.